Welcome back to another edition of the Fried Egg Golf Podcast. I am your host, Andy Johnson. Today, I have a giant podcast for you. I have two parts, two interviews. One with Todd Demsey that I conducted, and another with Chris Millard, longtime golf media person who's written a book, a new book. The Todd Demsey podcast was done by me. The interview with Chris was done by Garrett Morrison. Garrett is out of the country right now. He is frolicking about Melbourne, Australia. I'm very jealous. I'm envious of his trip right now. He's playing with some Australian golf legends at some of the best golf courses in the world. So today, who knows where he is today? But he just finished up Victoria. He's played Royal Melbourne East. I'm not sure where he's going today, but he is he's on quite the little trip down there. Todd Demsey will be up first, then Chris. Todd, for those that don't know, is a former PGA Tour player. He was a 4-time All-American at Arizona State in the 90s, a Walker Cupper. What's interesting about his life now is that he makes persimmon woods. He plays persimmon woods pretty much exclusively. He has played like PGA Tour qualifiers, Champions Tour, final stage Q School, playing persimmon. Just a very interesting person in golf. Chris Millard, he just wrote a new book. The new book is called The Shot. Watson, Nicklaus, Pebble Beach, and the chip that changed everything. So it's a look at the 1982 U.S. Open and Pebble Beach. A lot of the book is actually about the architecture of Pebble Beach. So Garrett and Chris talk in depth about this book and Pebble Beach, and that's the podcast. Before we get into the podcast, let's take a quick break and talk about our partner, Stripe. Stripe's been a partner of the Fried Egg for a really long time. Really, since we started to take payment. So we spent a couple years not doing any monetization, but when we wanted to make money on the website, we turned to Stripe, and Stripe's been an amazing partner. Honestly, like, great partners are partners that you don't have to worry about. I've never really had to worry about Stripe. So Stripe works for us. They also work for giant businesses like Alaska Airlines, Hertz, and the PGA. So many places work with Stripe. This is an amazing stat. It powers 1% of the total GDP. That's a large number. Stripe has a lot of products. You know, they have their online checkout, the general Stripe, where you go and you can pay for something and you check out with Stripe. One of the other cool products that they have that we use and over 300,000 businesses use, that's more than anybody else, is their Stripe billing product. They can do advanced billing software to handle even the most complex business models. So whether you need a flat rate monthly subscription, that's what we have, or usage-based billing, invoicing, or anything in between, Stripe Business helps businesses grow with smarter recurring revenue management. So if you want to learn more about what Stripe can do for your business, visit stripe.com. Todd, I would love to hear, you are becoming one of the foremost persimmon aficionados in the game of golf. I'd say you're on the forefront. Nobody else is playing persimmon in Champions Tour Q School. What is the process for building a persimmon wood like you're doing right now?
I start with pretty much just a raw block of persimmon. It's been treated and dried out by the Middle Ground in Kentucky. Really good guys that are still cutting persimmon, and I start with a pretty raw block, and sole plate, face insert, bore out the hosel, and shape it to whatever I want to create. So it's fun. I definitely in high school I used to refinish woods, but but now it's being able to create it from pretty much nothing is a lot of fun.
What type of tools are you using to like shape it down? Like, how do you get it into the head design? I'm also curious, like, do you play around with different designs? I know, like, I have a few different sets of persimmons with different features. Like, I have the Ben Hogan one that has the little like speed slot on it. Like, are you messing around with aerodynamic designs and trying to figure out, how you can improve them?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I try to, most people that are into persimmon are into the classic designs, but that speed slot, that is a good, I love that Hogan head, but I've messed around with some larger heads and some really small heads. And yeah, I mean, I'm always kind of looking to see what works, but try to stick to pretty classic designs and, keep it as simple as possible.
You mentioned, so you were into refinishing persimmons as a kid. I think like every kid, really probably from my generation to back, was into, like, I always remember as a kid, like playing around with lead tape and seeing what I can do. I think like a lot of that's gone with the modern clubs and club fitting where it's gotten to. But I used to, mess around with different setups and, you would do different things to your clubs. Like when you finished playing professional golf around, it was the, early 2010s. How did you get back into the persimmon world?
Yeah, it's kind of by accident. I didn't play much golf at first after the game kind of beat me up a little bit, and I didn't play much. But when I did go back out, I find myself just playing around with persimmons. It's just for me fun to, the feel and the sound and in my opinion, the way the game was meant to be played. Yeah, it was kind of by accident. I didn't really go out with the intention of making persimmons, but I started messing around with making some from scratch and got a lot of interest from friends. So I started making them for them, and then just kind of grew from there.
What have you seen? Is like what type of people, if you've thought about this, are kind of most drawn to the persimmon game and like what I see when I have mine in the bag is like golfers around me are just genuinely interested in hitting it. They obviously love the sound, but is there a type of person that you come across more often than not that is particularly interested in playing persimmon?
Yeah, I'd say mostly people in my age range, early 50s, that kind of played persimmon kind of at the tail end of persimmon, and then the start of metalwoods, which obviously really changed the game completely. So I think people that kind of appreciate how the game was, how, golf courses were designed for persimmon. They were not designed for the metal woods that are out today. So I think, but I have seen all ages. I've been surprised how many younger people are drawn to persimmon and the game, the way when you look at old highlights of great players in the past and playing what they played.
I mean, it's amazing when you look back at like the Shell's wonderful world of golf and just how much stylistically the difference of the game is with, persimmon woods than in comparison to the metal. Like just how dramatically different even the technique of the golf swing is. What do you see from your standpoint as someone who played on tour in the 460cc era? How is your golf swing and your approach to the game different when you play persimmon versus the modern technology?
Yeah, there's definitely a little more. With today's equipment, you can kind of swing for the fences and just let it go. Where then, I mean, it's still the same swing, but it's swing's a little less reckless than I see some of the swings today. And miss hits were an issue back then, where now you just kind of hit it anywhere on the face and it's going to get out there somewhere in play. So it's taken a lot of the skill out of the game, and has changed the way people swing the club for sure. I'm not a super technical person. I don't really analyze the golf swing, but it looks different when in the rare occasion when I watch a little on TV. It's swings are a lot different than what I remember growing up. So I think a lot of that is the equipment, which is kind of a shame, but it's not much we can do about it now. But I just like to keep the game the game I fell in love with growing up. That the beauty of the game and the equipment, and nobody was really trying to cheat the game with developing clubs that make it easier. I think the rules. It's once the metalwoods came out, the hollow heads, there's kind of a turning point in the game, and it would have been nice to keep solid heads, no hollow heads. It seems like it would be a simple rule, simple fix to what we got now, but it's definitely a little late for that.
You have played on the Champions Tour Q School, also some Monday qualifiers with the Persimmon woods. What is the general reaction of your playing partners when they see what you're rolling up with?
Yeah, it definitely gets some interest. And I'm not really, people that know me know I'm not really into the spotlight or trying to get attention. I'm kind of the opposite. So it's, I play it just because I love playing it. And, but yeah, people kind of wonder what I'm doing at times, but it's just, I'd rather just not play than play with some of this modern stuff that's really it's made the game just so much. You go play Cypress Point, great course that's now people hitting sand wedges into every hole, and it's kind of a shame, but I just do it for my own enjoyment and try to avoid too much attention. I just like to do my thing, but yeah, I understand where people wonder what I'm doing.
In my experience playing like Persimmon and 70s blades, I've got a set of Wilson FG17s that I play with a fair amount. To me, I don't think, like, if you play well, you still, like, you can't maybe quite bully the par fives as much, but like you still have the ability to shoot really good scores. I think this is like a misconception. People think like you're like turning it back to the Stone Age, and it turns the game into impossible. Like, if anything, I find like when I play Persimmon, I keep the ball in play a little bit more, even on poor driving days, because the ball just doesn't go as far offline. But like what I see is like I still have the ability to shoot really, really good rounds. It's just when I don't have it, it's a little bit more clear that I don't have it, right? Like it creates almost a little bit wider variance of scoring, but like it doesn't prohibit you from shooting a low number.
Yeah, I agree. It's if you're swinging it well, it gets out there almost as far as the modern stuff, and like you were saying, it's a little straighter. So yeah, I agree. It's not you're not giving up much when you're swinging it well. When you're a little off, it makes the game a little tougher. But that's just kind of the way it was designed to be played. So it's especially with my woods, they're kind of designed for the modern ball. Some of the older persimmons, if you try to, they were designed for balladas. so they can be tough. But mine are, you know, a little more weight in the back, a little more loft, a little less bulge and roll, and they tend to work well with the modern ball. So I really don't feel like I give up much at all. And then you add in just the enjoyment of enjoying the game, and that's worth a few shots, in my opinion. So yeah, it's.
I think just generally, like, I find my attitude when I play with the older stuff is better as well. And I think, like, and I have a friend that says that this is because you don't practice anymore and you know you're not as good as you used to be, and these clubs help you cope with that. But I do think, like, just in general, like, when you're, I think, like, I just find myself happier with the like, the feel of it is just so much more rewarding, right? Like, you know, you are swinging well when you're driving it well. There are no, you know, misconceptions about how you're playing.
Yeah, that's definitely true. You can't really fake it with persimmon and blades. You know, you either make a good swing or you don't, and you accept the consequences. And so yeah, that's I just feel like, you know, again, classic golf courses were designed for this type of equipment. So when people go out and say they shot 63 at Cypress Point, it's not really the same as Ben Hogan shooting 63 in the match. You know, it's like a totally different game. So it's kind of, you really can't, records have kind of gone out the window. You know, it's with you know, when Hogan's hitting, you know, mid irons into every hole out there, and guys are hitting sand wedges, it's not, you can't compare those scores. So but it's more about the enjoyment for me, and just enjoying playing golf. There's much more satisfaction on a good drive, and it's just what I remember as a kid growing up in the 80s playing golf. That's you know, getting on the first tee and looking at everybody's driver, the grain, the stain color. It's definitely different now. You get on the first tee and it's
you ask was your driver built with AI technology like mine was?
yeah, exactly. I know now you get on the tee and it's just whatever brand 460cc driver you got, and where it was a lot more, you know, started conversation, you know, looking at somebody's McGregor or somebody's Wood Brothers, and every driver was unique, one of a kind. So it's I don't know, it's not for everybody. I'm not trying to change anybody's mind about golf, but for me, it's just I don't think I'd play if I stuck to what the way equipment is going.
I've told a lot of people that I've played golf with this story this year, but we did a Hickory tournament, and we played like 72 holes of Hickory golf, and I played, you know, the day or two before it with Hickory clubs, and it was awesome. It was super fun, but you know, the Hickory clubs are heavier, and obviously then you have the small sweet spot. And I played a couple days after that. I played with modern clubs, and what I couldn't believe was I felt like it effectively was like speed training. I came back, I was faster, and because of the emphasis of hitting the club in the center, the next like 2 weeks I drove the ball better, as good as I've ever driven the ball, because of, like, if you think about like the mechanics of hitting these persimmons or Hickory drivers well, like you have to focus on center contact, and then the added weight is effectively like, you know, it's like a donut in baseball, right? So I think, like, what I'm saying this for is, like, I think like any like type of golfer, if you play with this type of technology every once in a while, when you come out of it, I guarantee you're going to play better with the modern clubs, because like you are going to like you cannot take a swing. I think like that's the biggest thing is like, I think I like can space out. I'm somebody that has a short attention span, and modern equipment allows me to space out, whereas retro equipment does not allow me that opportunity. I find myself more focused over shots, and that is a good thing just to do, because when you play the modern equipment and you bring that laser focus back, it is like you are going to play a lot better than before playing that stuff. So I think I think like people do this like cross, and I thoroughly, this is not why I play retro clubs, but people do cross training in all sorts of other sports. And I think that like one thing that nobody's really explored is how cross training with old equipment can help you play better golf with modern equipment. And I know that's not why you're doing it, but it is another avenue of appeal for this old equipment, is that I guarantee by playing, like what I found after playing, I played like probably a year and a half, 2 years of persimmon and blades. What I found is because I missed way more greens, my short game got way better over 2 years, right? My putting got better because I had more lag putts, because I was hitting longer approaches into greens. You know, like it made me a way more complete player by playing this equipment. And sure, like I didn't shoot all like the lowest scores all the time, but I knew I was improving over because of what the equipment was forcing me to get better at.
That makes a lot of sense. I used to coach some kids, some high school golfers trying to play college golf, and I would give them a persimmon wood, and I could see it with them. It helped their driving. It definitely has helped my driving. When I reluctantly do play a modern driver, it just is so easy. It's not even, it doesn't even feel like golf, but it's not really why I do it, but I agree that it can only help. You know, it's if you're hitting wedges into every hole, you're probably not missing many greens, and you're not really learning how to play the game. So I would definitely recommend it, even for people that aren't interested in it for the nostalgic reasons, to play them and see what it does for your game, because it definitely makes you sharp. You can't get away with a whole lot swinging persimmons.
So you had a great competitive career. I think you might say, oh, well, he might downplay it. See, you downplay stuff, but you were a 4-time All-American at Arizona State. You played on the Walker Cup. You made over 150 cuts on the PGA Tour and Korn Ferry Tour. When you look back on your career, do you have like a singular event or experience that stands out above all the other ones?
Yeah, I mean, definitely playing the Walker Cup was one of the highlights. Representing the U.S. and that definitely stands out. As far as pro golf, it all kind of ran together. It was a way to make a living, and I kind of squeaked by, but it was. I got away from why I played golf. I was just out there trying to, make cuts and make some money, and completely got away from why I started playing the game. And it's kind of why when I was done, I didn't play at all. And then when I did come back and play, I was going to do it differently with persimmons, and kind of the way the game, when I was introduced to the game, the way it was played. So
what is it about golf that you love the most at its core? You like the aspect of the game that the persimmon brings out. What is it about golf that you fell in love with as a kid?
Yeah, I think, it wasn't about the score. It was more about just being out in the, out in nature, and the course, being one with the course, and kind of, I mean, obviously you're trying to shoot a low score, but it was not in the top 5 of things that I was out there for. Where again, when I turned pro, it became everything. So, yeah, it just is a, I was much more into golf courses. That's one thing I did find when I went from amateur to pro golf. Went from playing, really good golf courses to still good courses, but not historic.
Not the same.
Yeah. I mean, I played 4 U.S. amateurs, and maybe they weren't the they were all good, but not. It was kind of a low point in the U.S. Ams. But the Champions Club in Houston was a highlight. But the Honors Course, TPC Sawgrass.
Do you have Muirfield Village around then too?
Muirfield Village, which that was good, but it was kind of an interesting stretch for USAMs, but
well, it's an interesting stretch for golf architecture. I think when you were growing up in the late 80s, early 90s is probably when you would say that golf architecture completely had most lost its way. 1995. You're talking about, like, at that point, the very starts of the careers of Tom Doak, Corin Crenshaw. These people that have brought back a lot of the great classic golf courses with restorations, and then also brought a whole new era of golf design into vogue. But that wasn't until really the early 2000s that you were on the PGA Tour at that point. Yeah,
that's true. I think Pete Dye put a lot of thought into his designs, and I think he was a genius. But yeah, 2 of my USAMs were Pete Dye courses, which is kind of amazing. But yeah, I definitely am drawn to the more classic designs, the more subtle features. And
if I was going to give you 10 rounds of golf, how would you break them out? You could bring whoever you want. So you can bring, assume you're flying private from course to course. You got 10 rounds with 3 of your favorite people. How are you splitting up the 10 rounds across courses?
I mean, growing up in San Diego, my first 5 will probably be California courses.
I live in California, and one of the things I love the most about here is the golf courses.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm in Florida now. I really miss that Poana, and how bad they get in the afternoon, and how I just miss that. I'm on this Bermuda here that's I don't know. I'm still trying to find courses that inspire me out here, but I would, Cypress, Pebble. Gosh, you
could do multiple rounds at courses too. This doesn't have to be 10. So you could say, I'm gonna play 5 at Cypress, and but you can break up to your 10 however you want. I saw your Walker Cup was supposed to be at Chicago Golf, and it got canceled.
Yeah.
What a bad break.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Interlaken was good.
Interlaken's great,
but yeah, Chicago Golf. I was able to finally play out there a few years ago for the first time, and that would have been fun. And I love Seth Rayner, and but yeah, Interlaken, a lot of history there with Bobby Jones, and but yeah, that. Going back to the courses I'd play, I recently played Pine Valley. A friend of mine is a member, and finally got to play out there. That is a amazing place. I wasn't what I expected. I thought it was just going to be really impossible, and which it kind of was. But It's pretty fair, it's there. You can't lose a ball out there. It's pretty hard to lose a ball, which I expected it to be different, but they've got it trimmed up pretty good where you're not going to lose a ball, and it's you either hit good shots or you don't, and it's relentless. But I would definitely want to play out there.
I think one of the interesting things about that golf course is like way better with Persimmon than Modern.
Yeah, the first day we played all the way back, which I don't know the yardage, and I don't know if those tees were there back in the day or not, but it was a little bit of a stretch. But the second day we played one tee up, and it was just perfect with Persimmon, being able to work it off the tee, and so yeah, that was a fun couple days. So as far as East Coast courses, that'd probably be my favorite. But yeah, I could just go up the California coast. Riviera.
I know you could do, like if you just did California and you did, LACC, Valley Club, Cypress, San Francisco, like in Cal Club, it looks pretty. You could do 2 at each of those 5. I mean, you haven't even talked about Riviera, Bel Air. It's kind of crazy, like how different and unique all those courses are from each other, Yeah,
that's the beauty of California. You got everything, every kind of weather, every topography, and yeah, the golf in California is it's what I grew up on, and so I definitely miss it. I was able to go out there a couple times this year and play some of those courses again. But I could, you never get bored playing golf in California.
You played with Phil Mickelson in college. I believe you were a brief roommate of Phil. Do you have a favorite story from or tale of Phil from his early years?
I mean, I can't think of a specific story, but he was just, you could tell he was going to do something great just being around him. His confidence and his, there was just something different there and he was always very good to me. He made my game better. I played a lot with him and tried to compete with him, and that really did a lot for my game, my short game especially. I realized just how good people can be putting and chipping. I mean, I had never seen anything like it. So it was a positive. I think it was just 1 year that I played with him, but it's kind of a shame to see he's kind of. I was hoping to watch him play some Champions Tour stuff, and I haven't seen much live stuff, but it's I was hoping he was gonna play more PGA Tour stuff for a while. He winning the PGA at 50, he still was competitive. So, but yeah,
I think. I was at that PGA, and I think because of like what's happened over the last couple of years, that gets a little bit overshadowed and not talked about as like truly one of the great sporting moments of the last, like, I mean, maybe one of the greatest sporting moments of like in the history of sports was that win. It was he had no form. And then, like, to take down Brooks Koepka, who at the time was like the preeminent major championship player, and like completely, it was walking inside the ropes that day. It felt like he just like played a game on him. Like he like kind of got him mentally. He slow played him and kind of, I think he drove him nuts. And part of how Koepka kind of folded was that he was frustrated with Phil and how slow he was playing. Like, it was like he was hustling him.
Yeah. I saw a lot of that, playing money games with him in college. And yeah, he's just such a competitor, and he'll find a way to win. He won 45 times on the PGA Tour. That's during the Tiger era too, so it would have been 60 probably at least if Tiger wasn't around. So he, yeah, just an amazing player. I've still probably never seen any. I played a little with Tiger kind of before he took off, but Phil was his game was different than anything I've ever seen before or since. And, again, it's kind of a shame that he's kind of, we don't get to see him play anymore, but he's an amazing player.
Your kids are competitive surfers, which I read, you grew up surfing and you've gotten back into surfing because of that. What is it about surfing that appeals to you? And do you think there's any bit of golf and some of the aspects of golf that surfing shares?
Yeah, I think they're both pretty solitary sports. You're kind of out on your own, whether you're on the golf course or in the water. So I do like that, where it's all on you. There's no team to bail you out. So I like that aspect, and physically it's definitely different, but a golf swing is a pretty explosive move, and so is surfing. Popping up on your board and making turns is pretty explosive moves. So they're similar in that way. But yeah, it's definitely a different culture. They're very different cultures, but I love the taking the kids to surf contests. A lot of good people, and it's definitely different than what I remember growing up playing golf tournaments. And,
the competitive surf scene is a little different than the competitive golf scene.
Yeah, it's. There's definitely some with the judging. It's there's a lot of with golf, you either shoot the number or you don't. With surfing, there's unfortunately more things that play into your results than your actual surfing. But it's hard. I don't envy the judges that have to judge surfing. It's so that part I'm not a huge fan of, but I love golf. It's all on you, and you either shoot the number or you don't.
What's one bucket list place that you want to surf, and what's one golf course that you haven't played that you really want to see?
My son recently went to Nicaragua, and I'd seen pictures that looked like ideal surf spot. So that'd probably be my place I'd want to go to surf. I've actually never been on a surf trip. I just surf at home with the kids, and so that would be. I'd love to do that at some point. I've never played golf in Ireland. I played some in Scotland, and I'd love to play some of those courses in Ireland. So no course in particular, but just
the surf culture in Ireland's like pretty good.
That's what I hear. So yeah, it could be combined for sure.
I know like Lahinch is like a huge surf town. When I was in Northern Ireland this spring, and Portrush is like a huge surf town. So you like go out there and it's like you're on Royal Portrush and you're playing, and then there's people. When you look down the dune, there's people surfing. You could surf and play world-class golf like all the way up and down the Irish coast.
Yeah, I didn't think of that, but I have heard that. I've read that book, that Ireland book. I forgot what it's called, but where he walks around Ireland. But
Course Called Ireland with Tom Coyne's book.
Right. So yeah, I definitely hear about the surf spots there. So yeah, that would be an ideal spot for sure.
Yeah, there was when I was over there, I mean, it's like a pretty cool culture. Like the surf. I mean, it seems like pretty popular. My sister-in-law, the last few years has been she's basically just taught yoga at surf camps all around the world. And one of them she taught yoga at was in Ireland. Now she's in Nicaragua at a surf camp there. But she's able to teach yoga and then go surfing every day. She's got a good life.
Sounds pretty good there.
But the when I was in there was this great map. I think I might have taken a picture on my phone. I'll have to try and find it. But there's this great map that like showed all like the surf spots along the coast, and it was really cool. You could kind of layer it up. That'd be a great all-time golf surf trip. But your oversized luggage would be tough. You know, you have a lot of it.
That's a lot of luggage for sure. But yeah, it sounds like it'd be worth it for sure.
Yeah. If for people interested in buying your clubs, how do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I've started a partnership with Power Built Golf, which I'm really excited about. So I make woods for them, and they put them on their website. So Power Built Golf is a good place to look for them. I do occasionally do some custom stuff still. But yeah, just todddemsey.com. But yeah, the Power Built thing, that's a classic company that was big in the 80s when I started playing golf. And so it's kind of a dream to be working with a company like that and making woods for them.
Irons look awesome too.
Yeah, they're doing just real simple forged blades and great putters. I'm doing some putters for them too, Persimmon putters, which I'm excited about. But they're just doing like a classic 8802 that looks so good, just the right amount of offset. And Paul Bowe and Travis Henderson there and David Martin at Power Build are great guys that are really doing some exciting stuff, getting back to the classic roots of the company.
I feel like, when we talk about all the things, like pros should have to play blade irons. Like now that they've gotten into this cavi back stuff, it's just like, why can't the best players in the world play blades?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And now you're seeing tour players with their highest iron is a 5 iron. They got hybrid 4 irons, 3 irons. It's yeah, I don't understand it because I can't hit a hybrid to save my life. But guys they'll have 3 hybrid. I mean, tour players 3 hybrids in their bags, and I don't know. They're obviously doing better than me, but I agree that it's I just think the game would be better if people played equipment that golf courses were designed for, and keeping as much of the people get better by improving their swing and their putting stroke, and not with a new piece of equipment that the scientist devised. It's back when I grew up, it was all on you. There wasn't this seemingly endless search to find the club that'll basically swing for you. And so yeah, it's just, I guess it's just the things change, and maybe others are better at adapting to the change than me, but I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
What you just described reminds me of just standing over a long iron shot with a old school blade, where you're just standing over and it's, maybe there's a lot of trouble around the green, and all you're thinking about is like, you just got to put a really good move on this one.
Yeah.
and having that's what you feel right before you pull the trigger is like, just make sure you move your body well,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's, you're definitely on your own in that situation. And
that's the beauty of golf right there, is that feeling where it's like, am I going to pull this off? I'm in this moment. It's an extraordinarily difficult situation, and we're going to see if we pull it off.
Yeah.
If we're going to be able to do it. And when you do it, there's nothing better. Nothing feels better.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I know. Now you're looking at a hybrid. It's a whole different shot. You can hit it anywhere on the face and it's going to get up there somewhere. But I never been able to hit them. They go, and
mine go left.
Yeah, that's my tendency too.
I just and now like I look at them and they're closed and they look closed to me, and I just I don't like them at all. I like the driving iron, the modern driving irons. They're basically the same thing, but those things are set up and look way better to me.
Yeah, they definitely. I agree, but those are hollow heads that have trampoline effect that's been a huge, guys are hitting those 280, 300, and what a difference, if you can get, it just changes the game so much. But yeah, I agree. They at least look kind of like golf clubs.
Yeah. All right. Well, Todd, thanks so much for coming on, and it was great chatting with you, and look forward to seeing you. Maybe we'll play Persimmon one day.
Sounds good. Thanks, Andy.
All right. Before we get to Chris Millard, let's talk about our friends at Good Walk Coffee. You probably have heard about Good Walk through this podcast. We partner with Good Walk Coffee. We make our own blend. I am like a fried egg coffee blend addict. I recently ran out. I had to get a coffee I used to drink, and I was missing fried egg blend. Luckily, I just got my monthly shipment yesterday, so I'm back on the fried egg blend. You can buy our coffee at goodwalkcoffee.com or on our website. But one of the things we did this fun holiday box with Good Walk Coffee. We have a holiday blend in it. It is a blend from Peru. The owners of that farm are women. It's a woman-owned farm. So we have a Peruvian blend that's a holiday blend in this box. You also have a Shotgun Start head cover for our other podcast, a Shotgun Start head cover with producer of this podcast, PJ, on it. And as well as a tumbler, a nice little tumbler. I use it to walk around the block when I might have an adult beverage, when I'm walking the dog, or in the morning when I have a cup of coffee. It's a great little tumbler. So you can buy our holiday box on our website at proshop.thefriedegg.com. Check out Good Walk Coffee. They are a great partner. Really love their coffee. Can't recommend it enough. It is also like a great gift. People love coffee. The holiday box is a great gift, but the coffee is also a great gift. So thanks, Good Walk. And let's get over to Chris Millard to talk about Pebble Beach and his new book.
I am here with Chris Millard, the author of a new book called The Shot, Watson, Nicklaus, Pebble Beach, and the Chip That Changed Everything. It was published by Back Nine Press. It's available for pre-order now, I believe, and shipping sometime in mid-December. Chris, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you, Garrett. Thanks for having me.
So your book is kind of centered around this shot by Tom Watson in the 1982 U.S. Open, the famous chip-in that everybody knows. But I thought we would take this book as a kind of excuse to dig into Pebble Beach's history a bit. A significant portion of the book is about that. It kind of doubles as a history of Pebble Beach, as well as a history of this one shot. So let's talk about Pebble. What was your first experience out there? When did you first see the course?
Well, the first time I ever saw the golf course was probably in the early 90s when I was working for Golf World magazine. And I was out there to cover something. And I thought, you know what? I'm in the general area. I can't be even in California without finding my way down to Pebble. So I just kind of wandered down there. I remember driving by 15T at Cypress and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm here. And then follow a 17-mile drive down. And so my first sighting of the whole place was really, I wasn't playing. I was just trying to soak it in. So it was a visual treat for me. And that was probably in the early 90s.
It's very easy to see the courses when you're in Pebble Beach.
I didn't expect
you can just
that.
kind of drive by them.
I didn't expect that. Like coming from the Northeast, if let's just suppose you want to do a drive-by and check in on Winged Foot, like
right.
It's just not going to happen.
Go out to Long Island and kind of, I guess you can kind of drive by some of those courses.
Some
of
them, like Shinnecock,
really.
you can try to drive right through it. But the idea that it's so exposed and so at least visually accessible to the average Joe just driving down 17-mile drive was kind of staggering to me.
I always tell people that you can just ask for coastal access at the entrance of the Pebble Beach Resort, essentially, and just drive in and kind of park next to the 17th hole. Yeah. And walk around and see the golf course. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that. It is pretty open. Here's a funny
little story. David Fay, you probably remember David. He was the executive director of the USGA for years. He wrote an introduction to the book. Tom Watson wrote a foreword and David Fay contributed an introduction. And Fay starts off his introduction saying, the first time I ever set foot on the Monterey Peninsula, I was, a 20-year-old kid in a friend's car, and I was just bombing down the road. And I thought, wait a minute, that's 15T at Pebble Beach, just to my right there. Holy cow. He pulled the car over, popped open the trunk, pulled out an old used ball and a rusty club and hit a shot on 15T. And he goes, I was back in the car and pulling away before the ball ever landed. But I could tell my friends I hit a shot at Cypress.
Yeah, I gotta outrun the cops after doing that.
Right.
But, there are hiking trails that kind of go through Pebble Beach. And I always tell people that there's a great hiking trail that essentially runs along the top of the big dune ridge that separates the dune holes at Spyglass Hill from the dune holes at Pebble Beach. There is a public hiking trail that you can, there are maps of these trails that you can find online, but you can just walk right by the inland portion of Cypress Point as well. I did many times when I lived in the area, and
I didn't know
a beautiful
that
walk.
Must be a beautiful walk.
It's incredible. Yeah. It kind of dumps you out right by the fourth hole at Spyglass Hill, third green, fourth hole. It sort of takes a turn there and goes along the fourth hole. But as you're walking along that high point, you can definitely see the ninth hole at Cypress Point and all those inland holes, which are so wonderful and beautiful.
That's a mental note. Next trip out there, I got to do that one.
Yes, absolutely. So what made you want to delve into the history of Pebble Beach, Chris?
Independently, Garrett, both Golf Channel and ESPN at various times in their existence cited Watson's chip as the greatest shot in golf history. And so a few years back, a friend of mine said to me, if those two organizations think it's the best shot in golf history, maybe there's something to it. Like maybe you should look into it. So I started researching the main characters in the drama. And if you think about it, they're Tom Watson and his caddy, Bruce Edwards, Jack Nicklaus, Pebble itself, the U.S. Open itself. And you track basically, and ABC and ESPN, which were in an interesting shadow dance at that time, which if you want to get into later, we can. You track all these characters up to the moment when Watson chips in. And then you see how that moment refracted all their lives. What did that moment do to them all? How did it change things? And the truth is, what I discovered is that chip changed everything. It changed the future trajectory of Pebble Beach itself. It changed Watson's standing in golf history. It marked the denouement of Nicklaus's career. It marked forever the rise of cable television and the extinction of the 3-network version of television we may have all grown up with. So it really changed everything. And that's why I thought the book would be kind of interesting.
There are all these different threads that feed into this one shot.
Right.
The television angle of it was the most surprising to me. And we'll talk about that later, but it's something I've been interested in for a long time as well. So I appreciated the history of the rise of golf television. I think that's a very interesting story that hasn't really been investigated.
I agree with you completely. Most of us have viewed golf on television for decades in our lives. And so it is the way most of us ingest or consume the game on at least a weekly or daily basis. I've always thought it was worthwhile to look at golf through the lens of how television looks at golf and how television presents golf. It's always been an interest of mine anyway, so I'm glad to hear you like that.
It's something I always think about when the Masters comes around, because the history of the Masters telecast is such a rich history unto itself. But of course, the Masters was not the first golf tournament to be televised in the U.S. That was really the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open was the one that was there kind of at the beginning, being televised. But we'll get to that later. Sure. First, I want to talk about some of the history of Pebble Beach. I love the detail that you have on the history of Pebble Beach in this book, because I think it's one of the more underappreciated or misunderstood histories among the great golf courses. It's also an unconventional history. You know, if you read enough golf course and golf club histories, you start to become familiar with a kind of common story structure about these courses. They were built by some great architect in the 10s, 20s, or 30s, and then they lost their way, and then they came back because Tom Doak or Gil Hance or Bill Corr visited and brought it back to its former glory. But that's just not the path that Pebble followed. This was a really strange kind of course with a strange early evolution, and you do such a great job of fleshing out the details of that evolution in this book. So first, the history of the land itself. There's a lot to say here, but briefly as you can, what was the history of the land at Pebble Beach before it was developed? So,
the Mexican influence on that part of California began to recede roughly in the 1830s, 1840s. And the property had it changed hands several times, sort of between the 1840s and the 1880s. I guess the best place to tune in to keep this sort of, short is when David Jacks bought the property. And a lot of people may not know that David Jacks is the man who gave the name to Monterey Jack cheese. It was a lot of the dairy required to produce that certain kind of cheese was produced on farms he owned in that area, and that's where Monterey Jack comes from. So the property changes hands a couple of times. I guess maybe the most important moment in the development of Pebble Beach really is the driving of the Golden Spike at Promontory Point. When we had rail travel that could essentially take you from anywhere in the U.S. to anywhere in the U.S., that's when Pebble started. That's when their moment arrived. And of course, the men involved in the driving of that spike, a lot of them were San Francisco household names, like Crocker and Huntington and Leland, all these guys. And they also happened to be the guys who wanted to drive some traffic down to property they owned down in Del Monte. Mm-hmm. And so long before Field of Dreams, these guys ascribed to the idea that if you build it, they will come. If you have a resort and if you can build a railway, people will start coming. And that was sort of the beginning of people coming to Pebble Beach. Actually, it wasn't even really thought of as Pebble Beach then. It was thought of as Del Monte. And there had been golf in Del Monte starting in the late 1890s. That beautiful little golf course, Del Monte Golf Club.
Right. Old Del Monte, as it's often called.
Yeah. And designed by Charles Maud in 1897. Great little beloved golf course in that area. So people had been coming to play golf in that region long before Pebble Beach was even a thought in anyone's mind. And the property continues to change hands a little bit. And around, the golf course really you talked earlier about how it's kind of a curious happenstance that Pebble Beach ever even came to be. It really is. I mean, I've often thought that it's not a coincidence that a golf course that was birthed not far from where the Grateful Dead came to be famous traveled along a strange trip. It really was a circuitous route. And originally that property, there was a group, the Carmel Development Corp, came to the people who owned that property and said, you know what, you'd probably be smart to develop homes here. And so, as stunning as it sounds, the Pebble Beach we know and love today was almost obviated by homes. And in fact, as you probably know, and any of the Pebble Beach historian devotees know, a lot was actually sold. Right. The William Beatty lot, which really, for people who've been to Pebble or watch it, essentially occupied the old fifth hole. And so when they retreated from this plan, fortunately, reason prevailed. They decided, you know what, if you build houses on this waterfront land, you're taking away the view of the houses that are up on the ridge. And there were more lots up on the ridge. So they realized they were going to get more money if they preserved what became the golf course. So they sold all the lots on the ridge. They all have, since there were more lots, that means more waterfront views. That means more income. And for the longest time, as you know, I know, Garrett, the fifth hole, that one lot, the family who did buy that one lot when they were thinking of developing it would not sell. Mm-hmm. And in fact, I don't think they sold that lot. It's the William Beatty family. I think it was like lot 3, block something. I can't remember. They wouldn't sell to Pebble until the 1990s.
Right.
And that's when Jack Nicklaus was actually hired to, when they did sell back to Pebble Beach, Nicklaus was hired to fashion a fifth hole that was really the original intent of the designers, to have a fifth hole that went more towards the water than away from the water.
Right.
And so that was like a kind of a thorn in the paw of golf purists for a long, long time that ultimately did get resolved. And I think you have a better fifth hole now than you did when you had to work around the Beatty property.
Well, there certainly was evidence of the kind of chaotic genesis of the course, that one house was sitting there on the coastline. It was the only real, it was the only property that was pressed right up against the coastline at Pebble Beach. And of course, the course had to work around it for a long time. The fifth hole, par 3, traveling inland, and then finally coming out onto that 6th tee where you then can get back to the coastline. And so that was sort of a funny little quirk of the property for quite a while. But yeah, it was, as you say in the book, it was originally meant to be kind of a real estate development, but then the notion of a golf course took hold, Samuel Morse being a key driver behind this idea.
I can't believe I neglected to mention him, because he was both the one of the problems and he was the problem solver. He was basically brought in to do the liquidation when they decided they were going to start selling these properties that are now the golf course. He was the one brought in to sell those. And he was an eager young Yale graduate, and he was gung-ho. He's going to do whatever he had to do to get the job done. And after he sold the Beatty property, he literally wrote, I forget where I found this, maybe in a memoir somewhere, he wrote, "I think I'm going to regret this."
He wasn't wrong.
Then he's the one who flipped it around and said, "You know what, guys? Rather than sell these direct waterfront lots, let's preserve the views and sell lots up top." And then ultimately that gave the owners of the land the chance to build the golf course, which preserved the lots, the views, but also was going to be open to the public and would further enhance their ownership of the resorts down there, which they were big investors in. And so the tourist trap nature of Pebble just got even more so when the golf course got designed. Of course, the next step is, all right, well, how do you get this golf course built? Who designs it? And as you read in the book, Garrett, that was a weird thing in and of itself. You look at who would be on your roster of your wish list of potential golf course designers in the mid 1916, 17, 18.
Yeah, it would be a fairly short list in America at the time.
That's right. And there were some real, all-stars. I mean, you had Donald Ross, you had Alistair McKenzie, you had Charles Blair McDonald, who you and I have talked about before. And there's some evidence that he considered all three of those. There's actually a little bit of confusion, maybe. He may have confused McKenzie and McDonald in his memoirs, but still, he had a who's who of potential designers staring him in the face for a great property. And he goes with the head-scratching combo of Neville and Grant, who between them had never designed a single golf course in their lives. And the amateur records they had, they were good players. They knew the game. But, like Jack Neville was a local guy, Walker Cupper. I mean, the guy was a real player, had never designed a golf course in his life. And neither had Grant. And somehow these two gave us Pebble Beach. But even the Pebble Beach they gave us isn't the Pebble Beach that we all know and revere today. It had to go through quite a few mutations.
What were Jack Neville and Douglas Grant's respective roles on the project? Do we have a sense of who was sort of the head of it and who might have been the tail of it, or do we not have that information? I
don't know if I have that in a concrete way, but I know that Neville. I don't know this. I sense from reading all this and researching it that Morse, who was doing the hiring, Morse, who became really the undisputed king of Pebble Beach, starting with saving this property in 1918 or so, all the way up until his death. He was really the king. Morse had a real soft spot in his heart for Jack Neville. And Neville was, over time, Neville became a bit of a pet to Morse. And Morse was actually quite protective of Neville and of Neville's reputation vis-a-vis Pebble. So even though, as we'll get into, Pebble took a lot of design twists and turns over its life, especially its life from conception in 1918-ish, 1916, through the 1929 AM. A lot of stuff happened in there. Morse was always protective of Neville's authorship and Neville's byline. And even when, a lot of people knew the changes that were being affected on Pebble Beach in the 1920s, Morse always stuck to this theme that, it was done by Neville and Grant. It was done by Neville and Grant. He always protected Neville, even when the facts said there's a lot of other people who deserve some credit here. So I'm gonna offer a conjecture that Neville was more the lead than Grant was, only because Morse had so much faith in Neville.
It's always been my sense as well. And there's also some kind of circumstantial evidence around the fact that Jack Neville went on to do some more design work in the future, whereas Douglas Grant kind of faded back into the obscurity of golf history a bit.
Yeah, Grant ended up moving. Donald, I made the same mistake Nicklaus made one time. He
called him Donald Grant. Yeah, that's in the book. Yeah, Jack Nicklaus called him Donald
Douglas
Grant.
Grant's the golf course designer. Nicklaus made that same mistake in his book.
That's true.
But I think Grant ended up moving back to England and really kind of ended up turning his back on American golf. But you're right. Neville was much more front and center for his whole career. I mean, whole life, even going way forward to when Sandy Tatum was asked to kind of redo the golf course. And he reached out quite emotionally, and a beautiful little piece of the book is when Sandy Tatum and Jack Neville worked together to prep Pebble Beach for the 82 U.S. Open.
So what are some of the big differences between the 1919 version of Pebble Beach and the one that we know today?
Wow.
Where would you go first and kind of describing to people how this golf course originally looked?
Yeah. So I'm going to take your question. You asked about 1919. I'm going to go back 1 year earlier to 1918. 1918.
Yeah, because there's this was news to me in your book, the fact that the course had been played before 1919.
So if you go into the pro shop there today and you buy a something with a logo on it, it's got the beautiful trees and the rocky promontory, and it says 1919. And of course, that's the day that everybody believes that Pebble Beach had its opening. The truth of the matter is that the golf course was opened on March 31st and, fittingly enough, April 1st, April Fool's Day of 1918. And the baptism of Pebble Beach was an absolute embarrassment that day. The conditioning was atrocious. There were rocks everywhere. There were sheep still grazing the property. The golf course was just not ready for prime time. And Morse and everybody involved with Pebble Beach at that time really put the brakes on and said, we're not ready. And they literally shut the golf course down. And Morse told his team, the golf course design team and the maintenance team, we're going to take a mulligan here. And they spent a year, almost a year, up until February of 1919. February 22nd, 1919, when they actually were now ready for the actual opening of Pebble Beach. And so that one little glitch, that year-long glitch, gets back to your point where you're saying of this strange trip and this strange, it's not a straight line story, Pebble Beach. It's a very curvy up and down story. So from a conditioning standpoint, and by the way, Pebble struggled with conditioning for a long, long time. Even when they were starting to get big time tournaments, like say the 61 Amateur, even the 72 Open. A lot of the great players were a little disappointed with the quality of the conditioning. And I guess we got to all remember that while Pebble is ostensibly rolling in money now when they're charging, I don't know, have they hit 1,000 yet for what does it cost?
It's not quite 1,000 yet. It's, they've virtuously kept it around, I believe, the $700 to $800 mark. But then there's the resort stay that is usually involved in being able to play at Pebble Beach and all of that. So it's not a cheap ticket.
So while we're, now they certainly have these streams of revenue coming in to help, and their reputation is so lofty they can levy those charges. If you go back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s even, and into the 70s, that wasn't really the case. I mean, there was no the promotional machine was much more muted. It was harder to get to Pebble. The techniques for managing turf weren't very advanced really anywhere until the 1960s and 70s. And it was tough. In fact, at one point, I think in the 1972 U.S. Open, of course, Nicklaus had won the Am there in 61. He comes back 11 years later and he wins the U.S. Open. And he turned to the head of the USGA and he said, "What'd you do with all the grass?" These are guys who had been playing Augusta National and these great places all these years, and they would come out to Pebble and routinely be a little disappointed. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for us in our current day mindset to imagine that it would be anything but pristine, but for a long time, Pebble was anything but.
It was kind of a working man's course for a while, that's kind of how it felt for a while. It was
a public golf course.
Yeah. I mean, there were glitzy people who would hang around the resort and all of that, but the course was a bit ramshackle and even rural feeling, maybe partly because it was kind of remote. That was one reason for its slightly shaggy nature. But that's certainly hard to conceive of now.
It really is. And not only was the conditioning an issue, but there were aspects of the golf course itself that were so looked down upon. Morse's goal was when he finally got his golf course built, his goal was, all right, I I need to land some attention. I need to get some people, some big names to come out here and play here and create a little excitement. So he created this thing called the Pebble Beach Open with, I think, a $5,000 purse, which at the time dwarfed most of the purses in professional golf. And he, with the scheduling skills of a boxing promoter, he scheduled his event to follow or precede. It was right around, either right before or right after the LA Open. So all the big names in professional golf were in town or in California. And so he got them to zip down and play in this thing to create a little publicity. And the complaints with Pebble had been two. One was the 18th hole, and this is you may know this, Garrett, but for the average person who watches Pebble, the 18th is almost a religious place. It's almost perfect. The 18th was the problem with Pebble Beach for much of its early life. And what Morse was trying to do was create enough interest in Pebble that he could land the California Golf Association state championship on that golf course. And that was his whole, his true north was, how am I going to get the California State Championship on my golf course? And people kept telling him, you can't get that event on this golf course until you fix up the 18th hole. And the problem with the hole at the time was that it was very short. And so a couple of solutions came about. One was, the first solution was offered by this guy named Arthur Bunker Vincent. And his idea was, hey, right behind 17 green, right where the beach is, let's pile up some rocks and sand and let's build a tee box right there, which would kind of require you to hit over a little piece of the bay and, you'd have a dramatic tee shot. So they did that, and that's why we have that tee box where we do. That's Arthur Bunker Vincent's tee box. But it did, while it added an exciting tee shot, it didn't do much for the rest of the hole, which was extremely short. It was kind of a stubby little par 4. And then, in another kind of circuitous happenstance of Pebble Beach's evolution, Marion Hollins, who moved out from the East Coast out to Pebble and was kind of a high society matron. She was very friendly with Herbert Fowler, who was a very prominent golf course designer. And Fowler had done some work on Del Monte in recent years. And he and Marion were social friends. And that sort of led to Fowler being asked for his thoughts on 18. And Fowler basically says to Morse the same thing that the California Golf Association had said to Morse, which is, you're not going to get our golf tournament on your golf course until you fix 18, and it's got to be thorough going change. Vincent's tee box was a nice idea, but you need a dramatic change. And that's when Fowler stretched it 170 yards further up the coast. So he added 170 yards to that hole. And that's what kind of put Pebble over the finish line for the California Golf Association. And that's what landed him the California State Amateur, which was held there for years and years. And that's when Morse started thinking about bigger game. Like, okay, now I've got my attention getting golf course. Now I'm getting the great amateurs to come and play their championship every year. Now I'm cooking with gas. So that it was really the combination of Arthur Vincent's tee box concept and then Herbert Fowler's 170-yard addition to the end of the hole that helped Morse put Pebble on the map. Went
from about a 330, 340-yard par 4 to a pretty stern par 5.
Exactly right. Time. And can you imagine? Now imagine whether you've played Pebble or not, you've seen it on TV a million times. Imagine if you walk off 17 and like the tee box is immediately to your right. It's not like out towards the water. It's just right there. Mm-hmm. And you're kind of bunting one. You're not even hitting over the water at all. It's It's hard to imagine. And it's easy to get in the California Golf Association's head and say, oh, I get it. I get why they hated 18. And now when you look at what you have at 18, it's just incredible.
Does a good job of fitting with the rest of the course too. It doesn't feel like it was designed by somebody else or somebody who had not routed or conceived of the other holes that run along the coast.
I mean, look at 8 and 9 and 10. Well, look at 6 and 8 and 9 and 10. It's easy. It would be easy for us to believe that the same person who laid those out is the same person who did 18, even though it's not.
Yeah, 18 is sort of a mirror image in some ways of 10.
Exactly right.
Strategically, conceptually as a golf hole, the way that it uses the coastline, pretty similar.
I agree completely. And the other hurdle that Morse had is, as the better players started to come to Pebble Beach for more California state championships, you had better quality of play and you had more sophisticated judges of quality. And so they ultimately started to hone in on holes 8 and 13, the green complexes at 8 and 13. And their concerns really were that those green complexes were not really designed to receive the kind of iron shot the fairway was demanding. So, in what I'm sure he hoped was an audition for future work at Pebble Beach, Alister MacKenzie weighed in through Marion Hollins, and they were very close, as you know. And he came in to redo 8 and 13. What happened was he started on 8 and 13 and got called away to Australia for another design job. Meanwhile,
Royal Melbourne, that was
exactly right.
Mackenzie's famous trip to Australia happened kind of in the mid 1920s.
So he goes down to Australia, and meanwhile, 8 and 13 aren't finished. So all of a sudden, people are playing. They're going, wait, we told you to fix 8 and 13. These are atrocious. And what they didn't appreciate was that Mackenzie was in it was kind of a work in progress. And that when he came back from Australia, he finished 8 and 13. And then everyone went, all right, well, now we've got a legit golf course. And that even put Pebble a little bit further on the map, a little higher on the map. And then, of course, in the late 20s, in 1927, the USGA announces they're going to bring the amateur to Pebble. And of course, Pebble goes through an entirely new evolution for that.
Well, before we get to that, 8 and 13, Mackenzie's changes there. If you've seen the photographs of these holes, and I would suggest that anybody listening to this podcast who hasn't seen Mackenzie's versions of the greens at 8 and 13, there are great pictures of them. Go check out an article called Pebble Beach Then and Now. If you just search for that in Google, something will come up on the Pebble Beach Resort website that will show you a bunch of photos of those holes through the years, including Mackenzie's versions of those greens. They're very Mackenzian greens,
Yes.
Recognizably his work, similar in many ways to what he was doing at that very time, just down 17 Mile Drive at Cypress Point.
Yep.
And so they were in his style in a way that they aren't anymore. And also very different from what came before at Pebble Beach. We talked about some of the rudimentary nature of Jack Neville and Douglas Grant's original design at Pebble Beach. One way in which it was rudimentary, I think, is that the greens were very simply constructed.
Yes.
Many of them pretty large and just kind of sitting on the land in very basic ways, and not without these kind of stylish bunkers or anything of the kind that Mackenzie was famous for. And so that's what Mackenzie was working with. He really changed the style of those greens quite a bit.
Not only that, you're exactly right, Garrett. He changed 8 and 13 enormously. I do believe, just from the studying that I've done, the reading I've done, I do believe Mackenzie desperately wanted to get his hands on the whole golf course. I think he really, and doing 8 and 13 was his way of saying, I'm available for these other 16 holes.
Right. This is kind of my example. These are my paint swatches here.
Right.
Yeah.
But then 27 rolls around and they announced the USAM is coming to Pebble, which really is like that's a cultural moment for the USGA itself to have these sort of westward ambitions. That was quite a thing to bring the most prestigious USGA title really at the time to California. That was like a moon launch, and they pulled it off.
Tournament was a much bigger deal back then than it is now. You know, it's absolutely a big deal now, but you know, this is a tournament that Bobby Jones was playing in.
Exactly right. So that was a huge moment, not only for the USGA and its kind of westward or national ambitions, but also for Pebble Beach, because now we've talked about a lot of these little evolutionary twists and turns it took. Now they had to get the golf course ready for what the New York Times referred to as the onslaught. And so how do you do that? You touched on something that I didn't really connect in the book. I kind of wish I had. When Mackenzie does the 8 and 13, that I think may have lit a bulb in the head of Chandler Egan, because that's who they ask. You know, they bring in Hunter and Egan, the odd couple of Hunter and Egan, to get the golf course ready for the 1929 Am. Hunter being an avowed socialist who ran for the governor of Connecticut as a socialist and wrote some pretty heavyweight tomes on sociology and communism, politics, religion. And Chandler Egan, who is arguably one of the first it boys of American amateur golf, you know, NCAA champion, multiple AM champion, Olympian, you name it. And
aristocratic sort of, you know, kind of an amateur in the Bobby Jones mold, right. Contrasted with Robert Hunter. There is a bit of a mismatch there, but both men, of course, had worked with Alistair Mackenzie. Robert Hunter assisting on some of Mackenzie's most famous California
and
designs.
Then he goes on to write one of the probably top 5 greatest books ever written on the history of golf course architecture, you know, The Links, which is just a must read. So this odd couple is brought in, and, you know, to their credit, you know, a lot of their quotes, and Chandler Egan, I think, had a slightly higher profile than Hunter at that time anyway. And a lot of his quotes about this prep for the US Am in 29 were things like, God had done most of the work already. Most of the heavy lifting was done already. There wasn't much to do except really bunkers and greens. And to your point, that was kind of a weak spot of Pebble Beach, were the non-Mackenzie bunkers and greens, the other 16. And if you talk to Jeff Shackelford about this, who's really a real student of Pebble Beach golf course design history, we spent a good amount of time on the phone. He basically says, when you look at what Egan did for the 29 Am at Pebble and the results that Pebble got out of the work he did, Egan may be the most underappreciated golf course designer in history. And I think that's a pretty good argument, especially when you go back. If you look, you know, you recommended that article about Pebble Beach, you know, go back and look at the images. If you go back and you look at the images of Pebble Beach from the 1929 era, the bunkering is just spectacular. Now, there's one really important thing happened in 1929 that we haven't touched on, and of course that's the crash and the ensuing depression. Most of the great clubs, I mean, you know this from having been out there so long in California, you know, Cypress Point almost closed its doors during the Depression. They were filling in bunkers in order to reduce maintenance costs. And if Cypress Point was filling in these massive Pantagruelian bunkers to save costs, you can be sure that Pebble Beach was doing the same thing. And these huge bunkers that he put in were also susceptible to the wind. You know, the bigger the bunker, the easier it is for the wind to get in there and suck all that sand out. So I think The bunkers that Egan and Hunter put in were absolutely beautiful. I wish they still existed, but I understand why they don't. They couldn't. But for that moment in 27, 28, 29 during the AM and until the Depression hits and wipes it all out, that may have been one of the really most beautifully bunkered golf courses in the world.
Well, for people who haven't seen photos of the course from this era, just envision a lot of the greens that you know now, like 7, 4, 17, being surrounded by these kind of dunescape style bunkers, completely surrounded. In a lot of cases, they aren't even really discrete bunkers. They're more like the green is kind of an island in this sandscape. It's almost like what you see at Mammoth Dunes or something like that at Sand Valley, where there's just a lot of exposed sand.
And Egan said somewhere, I think I may be in the book, Egan said somewhere that this was something that we cooked up. We hadn't really seen this anywhere before. It's just something that we thought would be kind of cool, to use, my vernacular. And we tried it. And of course, it looks amazing. It was ill-fated. It wasn't going to last forever, but for that moment, it sure was spectacular.
Yeah. I'm of two minds about this move by Egan. And I'm curious also about Hunter's involvement in it too, because Hunter is often known in his work with Mackenzie as sort of the artisan of the bunkers and the on-site construction guy. And I wonder if he played a similar role in this project, but I'm of two minds about this move by Egan's team to create these dunescapes, because on the one hand, they're clearly very impressive. When you see these photos, they're stunning, and especially in their difference from what exists there now, you almost can't believe that the course once looked like this.
Yes. On
the other hand, it's not natural to that terrain for there to be these dunesy bunkers. It's kind of an odd fit. And partly for that reason, they were maybe never going to last because of the wind and because of the fact that there just isn't a base of sand there on Pebble Beach's property to keep this kind of construction in existence. Once they blow away, you've just got heavy clay, basically,
which, to your point,
under the surface.
That may be exactly the reason why they never existed before and never existed again.
I think they just blew away.
Right. I wonder if Egan even had in his mind, this lipstick is going to wear off, but boy, it sure does look. It's going to look good for
the tournament,
for the amateur. Right.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, the Depression hit, and I'm sure that the maintenance, requirements of these dunesy bunkers were part of the reason that they didn't survive. That they just took a lot of effort and funding to maintain, and that's not something that Pebble Beach or many other courses in America had during the 1930s and during World War II.
No doubt about that. And by the way, if any of your listeners or viewers do go look at old images, when you look at 17 and those old 29 era images, look to the spot in the back left of the green where Watson plays this chip that spurred this whole book. That slope where he was sand back in the 29 amateur era. And so just for a little sense of connecting history, connecting the dots, he would have likely been in sand if the Chandler Egan design had survived. And that would have been a way easier shot for Tom Watson anyway than chipping out of, a shin-high rough.
Right. So Egan and Hunter's work, I think, is maybe primarily remembered for these dunescapes that they built, because that's the most visually striking part of what they did. But what are some other aspects of the course that you would credit to that renovation? What are some other ways in which they altered the course in ways that proved to be kind of permanent?
Let's see. That's a tough question, because I don't know if I can come up with something lasting,
right,
that we could point to today and say, yeah, that's Egan. Or
a lot of it went away, I guess. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
The old double ninth fairway. If you play the ninth hole now, you look to the right and you see a whole other expanse of now kind of rough that is right by the ocean cliff. Well, that was once fairway, and that was an idea.
And the old tee box.
Egan's.
Remember, didn't they open a wasn't there a tee box down closer to the water on 9?
On 10.
It was on 10. It's on 10.
Yes.
Sorry. About
that. And they reestablished it. It's,
That's
if
right.
you walk to the right of the ninth green, but they don't. It's not very frequently in use.
That's right.
But it's a cool tee box.
But I can't. That's a really good question. I guess it lends itself to the ephemeral nature of what Egan and Hunter did. They put Pebble on the big time map, but with changes that were just going to fade away. It's wild.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I think one thing though, and there's no particular evidence for this, but I think it's true that they established the greens of Pebble Beach.
Yes.
That sort of still exist now. They're smaller now than they were when Egan and Hunter built them, but they still have some of the character, some of the design concept that I think Egan and Hunter came up with. Basically, the design concepts of the greens at Pebble Beach, I believe to be Egan and Hunter's for the most part, and not Neville and Grant's.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. That's the only area where I could visually point to and say, before Egan and Hunter, this did not exist, and now it does. I think probably the green surfaces are the only thing you could point to.
Yeah, and I think the main difference now between the greens as they exist now and as they existed in the 1929 U.S. Amateur, I think the main difference would be that they were bigger back then, and probably some contours have been lost over time. But if you look at the 17th green, for instance, which you write an account of in your book, that idea of the green as this kind of hourglass shaped thing with two different sections divided by a ridge, that was a Chandler Egan concept for a green. And that's still there, basically.
Yeah, that's still basically there. I mean, it's changed in some ways only because as the shape and size of the green has changed over time, the proportional space filled by the hump in the middle has changed a little bit over time. Sure. But in a larger sense, you're right. That is the original Hunter Egan look.
The basic concept. Okay.
Yep. So
going forward in time a little bit, why didn't Pebble Beach get a U.S. Open until 1972?
Well, I asked Frank Hannigan about this once, and Frank is one of the great truth tellers in all of golf, or was. He passed away years ago, but I asked Frank, and his quote, he's actually in the book, California, while now a economic behemoth, really in the 1920s and certainly during the Depression in the 30s, and really until after World War II, didn't have that many people living in it. And particularly Northern California was not as populous as Southern California. LA was growing a lot faster than the area around Pebble Beach. And if you look at the cities and the markets into which the USGA had taken the U.S. Open, these are big places. These are New York and Chicago. They were worried. Frank Hannigan tells me that even for the 1972 U.S. Open, the USGA was worried that, what would happen if you put on a U.S. Open and nobody came? There just weren't the bodies. And plus, it was the first time they were going to have the U.S. Open at a public golf course, quote unquote, public golf course. And a public golf course didn't have the ready-made volunteer base that a private club would have. And so there were some doubts about that. There were always doubts about conditioning, as we talked before about Pebble Beach. So those were the big three strikes against Pebble. And they, literally Frank Hannigan said to me, we were worried that nobody would come. In fact, the USGA's contract with Pebble had a stipulation that if a certain amount of people didn't show, there was going to be some kind of refund back to the USGA. Like the Pebble had to get out and say there'll be bodies here. So it was that's really why it took a long time for the US Open, which, you and I talked earlier about how the AM was for the longest time was the golden child of USGA championships. In my own mind, I've always thought that once Bobby Jones started routinely winning Opens, he added glamour, the prestige that he lent to the amateur, that the amateur always had. It started to leach into the U.S. Open and even onto the professional players who were playing golf at that time, because Bobby Jones, he raised all ships in a way. And so to bring their biggest, what had now become their biggest title, the U.S. Open, to Pebble Beach seemed like a no-brainer, but as I said, there were a lot of risks involved.
What was the relationship between television and Pebble Beach? And maybe you could take that story up to the 1972 U.S. Open, where there was an important element of that tournament being televised.
So, as you mentioned earlier, the 1947 U.S. Open was the first golf tournament ever telecast. And if you try to imagine where TV was in 1947, it was extremely primitive. I mean, and this isn't even really an exaggeration, but like TV cameras were like as complicated as a car. You know what I mean? Like now you could film a TV show with your iPhone and people might not know the difference.
And you can beam the image across the air, right?
Yeah, exactly.
As opposed to having to,
cables.
Just imagine trying to film a golf tournament. If you've got these massive cameras and you can't communicate, the camera isn't, you have to figure out a way to connect everything, right? It's
insane. And the people who I've spoken to, there's a lot of people in this book in the TV industry that I talked to about the evolution of golf and TV. They'll tell you that, the hardest sport to film for TV is golf, because tennis or baseball or football all take place in a very predictable, confined area. And golf takes place over hundreds of acres with a small ball going hundreds of miles an hour. You can't be everywhere. You can get every shot in a tennis match pretty easily. You cannot get every shot in a golf tournament. So it's maddening to try to do television, to golf television. And these guys in 1947 in St. Louis just figured they'd give it a go, and it was very much like an entrepreneurial kind of jury-rigged concept. They literally, the entire telecast consisted of approach shots into 18 because, they didn't have mobile.
What else could you do?
Handheld camera where you could walk with the guy up to 18 green. So it started and ended with the approach to 18. And to show you how naive this all was, one of the guys went up to Ben Hogan, who was playing in the tournament, and said, "Hey, Ben, do you think you could do a little interview, like stand here in front of our camera and chat with us?" And he kind of had to explain like what it was all about. Now what player doesn't walk off 18 in a tour event know that there's the media guy? So they had to say, well, we have a camera here and that's what we're going to do. And Ben Hogan said to the guy, well, I think I've got time to chat with you guys, but, how about $50? And the guy says, we don't really, he set the standard really. That was
there
the
you go. Yeah.
Time.
He protected journalism in that
Exactly
moment.
right. Imagine if the guy said, here's
$50.
$50. Where would we all be?
Yeah.
So the guy said to him, no, we don't pay for that. And Ben said, great, I'm gone. So now go from literally the 47 Open filming approach shots into 18. Move ahead later in life, television's become a little more sophisticated, and Roone Arledge is now overseeing ABC Sports, which had the contract to air the U.S. Open up until the early 90s. And Terry Jastrow, who went on to become unbelievably successful and well-regarded television producer and director, they're all working at ABC Sports, and they're working on preparing to broadcast the Pebble Beach U.S. Open. And so they're doing site visits and where are we going to put our cameras and all this stuff. And they get this idea. They say to themselves, golf has always started at, like, in the old days at St. Louis, the 18th hole. Even more recently in the 70s, we were only showing golf from like the 11th hole on. And they say to themselves, would you cover a baseball game starting in the third inning? And they're like, no, you wouldn't. And so they come to this idea that a great golf telecast of the US Open especially ought to have as much golf as possible. And if you're at a place like Pebble, even more so, because you're going to have such vistas. So they call Rune Arledge from their site visit at Pebble. And they say, and Rune has played in the Crosby, but at this time, Rune is a regular in the Crosby Clambake playing with Tom Weiskopf. He loves Pebble as much as anybody. So they call Rune and they say, hey, we're out here doing the site visit. We were thinking, maybe, is this crazy? Maybe we ought to be showing more holes and more of Pebble and more of these views. As I say in the book, asking Rune Arledge if he wants more Pebble is like asking Christopher Walken if he wants more cowbell. So he says, that's a great idea. Absolutely great idea. He says, why don't we get as much as we can? In fact, instead of just doing like 1 hour, let's do like 3 hours. And then Rune had to come up with the decision, well, where are those 3 hours going to come from? And of course, he was the godfather of Wide World of Sports, which was just the it show in all sports television at that time. And so he said, great, we'll just we'll take 2 hours from Wide World of Sports and make it golf coverage. And that's when that's the first time that golf ever got the big window, the big block of television time to show early holes going back. I think maybe in that Open, they might have started around the 6th hole, something like that. And eventually at Southern Hills, I think in 77 might have been the first time that they ever were able to show all 18.
Did all 18. And at Pebble Beach, surely part of the motive would be, we want to make sure to show the 7th hole at the very least, like get back far enough in the round so that you can see some of that 4 through 10 stretch, which is so great. Whereas if you start at 11 at Pebble Beach, you're not really showing Pebble Beach in a way that would satisfy anybody.
Exactly. And speaking of motives, in their early discussions, Jastrow had spoken with the general manager of Pebble Beach itself. And the general manager was complaining to Terry, this is all in the book, that, hey, times at Pebble are tough. We're not selling out our rooms. We're not selling out the golf course. We're having a hard time. And so, hey, Terry, when you air the US Open, can you do us a favor? Can you, rather than just showing golf action, can you just sell the lodge a little bit? Can you sell the experience a little bit? And so I went back and I looked at the footage of those all 4 days of the telecast. And every day, the opening shot is a tight shot of the front door of the lodge. And, the announcer says, you're looking live at the lodge at Pebble Beach. And he talks about what a fantastic place it is. And then they pan back and they turn 50 yards away is the first tee of one of the great golf courses in the world. And the phones are lighting up. People are reserving rooms again. And Jastrow and the general manager Pebble said, that hosting that Open, airing that Open is what kind of revived Pebble financially.
Yeah. So television and Pebble Beach have certainly been intertwined very, very intimately ever since.
Very much so.
To get to the kind of final beat of your story about TV and Pebble, the 1982 US Open represented yet another innovation in golf telecasts, right? Yet another expansion of the coverage. Maybe you could say a few words about that.
So up until 1982, golf in America had only been broadcast on weekends. You'd only been able to watch it on a Saturday or a Sunday. So ABC has the rights, the television package. And what they would do is they would bring their whole crew out to a venue and they would use the Thursday, Friday rounds as practice for what would be the coverage on Saturday and Sunday. So the cameras would literally try to train kind of know the angles of the ball flight and kind of get all that down on Thursday and Friday. So they'd be ready on Saturday and Sunday. Well, this teeny little cable contraption called ESPN, which was just starving for both programming and money, approaches ABC Sports, which was the Leviathan, and says, what would you think about us airing your Thursday and Friday rounds on our little cable net, and then you guys can do your Saturday and Sunday rounds? And of course, this meant that the ABC Sports cameramen and announcers and PAs, the whole staff, were going to be live on Thursday and Friday, meaning they would forfeit those practice days. So it meant more tension and more work and less practice. And so the ABC people were a little bit, the staffers anyway, were a little bit cold to this idea. And the disdain that broadcast television had for cable television at that time cannot be overstated. I mean, broadcast television was essentially Hollywood, and cable television was, the Des Moines affiliate. You know what I mean? Like there was no glamour attached to cable, even though at that moment, what was kind of bubbling up under the surface was we were about to go from a 3-network universe in television, ABC, NBC, and CBS, into this dozens of channels, hundreds of channels, cable universe. And that the cable companies were going to be receiving money, not only subscriber fees, but also advertising dollars.
Yeah,
and
probably
so,
the greatest business model
exactly
ever
right.
invented, which is now collapsing, by the way. But
exactly right.
But for about 40 years there, it was
that's exactly
high
right.
times.
And so while ABC was in the catbird seat in terms of glamour and prestige, the future was clearly going to be cable television. And so this all unfolded that week at Pebble in 1982 with this upstart cable network trying to work with and ultimately usurp the leader, the ABC Sports leader. And that moment happened. They finally agreed to do it. And right before they went on air, Kurt Gowdy, who was one of the announcers for ABC. No, it was Jim McKay. I'm sorry. It was Jim McKay. Jim McKay says to everybody over their earpieces before they're about to go on air on Thursday and Friday, he goes, hey, don't waste your good stuff today or tomorrow. It's only cable.
It's only cable. That's good stuff. Well, you get to the end of that tournament, 71st hole, Watson chips in. I rewatched this before our interview with an eye toward the telecast of it.
Yeah.
And what I noticed was that it was a very well executed telecast. It represented kind of how far golf television had come since 1947 when they were just showing those approach shots,
yes,
and how far it had come since those Masters tournaments that they broadcast in the 1960s, when it was sort of similar. They would only cover a few holes at a time. It was black and white for at least a few years there at the beginning. You get to Watson's chip in 1982, and the crew knows exactly how to deliver that moment.
Yes.
You see the shot itself in a wide shot. You see the ball go in. And then you have these different cameras, these different angles, the close up on Watson showing his run across the green, cutting to the crowd and showing the crowd going crazy, and then back to Watson as he continues to celebrate and points at his caddy, Bruce Edwards, and says, I told you so, basically, because he told him before the shot that he wasn't just going to get it close. He was going to hole it. And, looking at this, I was like, well, this is basically a modern golf telecast. They got there. Everything yes, that's really important. I mean, there's a bunch of bells and whistles now that they have that they didn't have back then, but really that's all you need right there. The ability to show these shots from a number of different angles and to have the commentators following along live and delivering the moment. They really were able to do that.
It was almost cinematic. Like if you take footage from just your random event, take the 1965 U.S. Open. I don't even know, Belle Reve. I don't even know where it was. Take footage from that and compare it to the footage you just described from 82. And the advances in golf television are almost undescribable. But a lot of that vision, a lot of that sort of intimacy and the warmth and the humanity is actually brought to the screen by Roone Arledge. That was his thing. And I don't know, you may not be old enough. I don't know. You might be. Do you remember
1982 was 2 years before I was born, if that gives you an idea.
Well, you might be, you're probably a little too young to remember, but Roone Arledge brought this thing about in the 1970s, and probably it lasted into the 80s, called Up Close and Personal. Mm-hmm. And it's become almost a cliche in TV now, but Up Close and Personal, the idea of Up Close and Personal was that, particularly in the 70s, when this thing really took off, maybe it could have been the early 80s, Roone had this belief that if I knew you in some way, I would care more about what you're doing on the field or on the golf course or on the tennis court. And so if I could somehow get a little bit closer to you with my camera, and if I could see your eyes a little bit, eyes were huge. And if my announcers had something a little more about you than he's born in California, like maybe that you played golf at this college and that you had been a left-hander and switched to right. And so more personal detail. And so that the better I knew you, the more I would care about what you were doing on TV. That was the essence of Up Close and Personal. And Jastrow talks about it in the book, in the chapter where we detail this TV moment and what went into these shots. Jastrow talks about the importance of having the best cameramen in the business in position to get all the shots they wanted, close-ups of the ball. Like, for instance, you would not have seen a close-up of a golf ball in the 1965 U.S. Open telecast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you got a real good look at the ball, and you got a I am there sense. And you had multiple guys with low-angle cameras, multiple guys with high-angle cameras. In fact, to get that balletic response by Watson is really a tribute to the cameramen, because that just didn't happen a lot in golf. And it certainly didn't happen a lot with Watson. He was a very reserved guy. It's ironic, really, that his greatest shot is marked by the most un-Watson-like celebration you've ever seen in your life. Mm-hmm. And the fact that they were able to record all that live is a testament to the evolution of golf television, but it's really a credit to Roone Arledge and to Terry Jastrow and to Chuck Howard, who really nailed down how to do golf TV.
And then beyond that, it's in color, and it's showing Pebble Beach.
Yes.
You can see the ocean, you can see the course. And I think that probably changed a lot of things for Pebble Beach, being able to be beamed into people's living rooms in color so that people could actually see what this golf course looked like.
Yeah, I think it did. I think really almost starting in 72, when people got to watch Nicklaus hit the 1-iron in 17,
yeah, right,
stretching through 82, and really even to when they went there in 92. The best ad you could ever have for Pebble Beach is a U.S. Open at Pebble Beach. And from the time that Golf Digest started ranking courses, you see a huge rise in Pebble Beach's stature the more it's been on television in U.S. Opens. So, to Jastrow and the GM's earlier point about, now they were selling rooms, like the U.S. Open and the ABC put Pebble back on the financial map. I think it's also carved out for Pebble Beach a permanent place in golf course lore. I mean, it's just spectacular, and it loves the camera.
Well, Chris, it was great to have you back on the podcast. Again, the book is called The Shot, Watson, Nicklaus, Pebble Beach, and the Chip That Changed Everything. available for order now. Maybe by the time this podcast comes out, in fact, copies of the book will be getting shipped out to people. So congratulations on the book, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Garrett. Thanks for having me, and happy holidays to you and all your viewers.
Yeah, to you as well.
All right. Thank you for listening to another edition of the Fried Egg Podcast. I hope you liked this monster episode here. Gotten a ton of feedback about the Bob Crosby episode earlier this week. Thank you. That was really fun. I'm sad that Bob had a hard stop. That conversation probably would have kept going. We will definitely get him back on in the near future to have a part 2 of that discussion. But thanks to PJ for editing and producing this podcast. He has been a busy boy. We've got Year in Review going on Shotgun Start, and he is churning out the audio content. We've got 2 more weeks of pods and then a little break. We're going to take a holiday break, but we've got some goodies in store for the holidays. Thanks to everybody for their ongoing support. And if you're looking for another type of holiday gift, check out Club TFE, our membership. That's a great gift for people if you want to gift yourself, if you want to learn more about golf courses, architecture, if you want to join our community, talk about golf with other golf sickos. Check out Club TFE. That's thefriedegg.com/membership. Thanks.